And now to our first conversation. We see Africa has long been a global powerhouse in commodity exports, oil from Nigeria, cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire, copper from Zambia, and platinum from South Africa. But in today's volatile economic climate, this dependence presents both opportunities and risk. With geopolitical tensions, fluctuating global prices, and climate change disruptions, African nations face urgent questions right now. Joining us to unpack this, I have Ted George, the Chief Narrative Officer at Cleo's Advisory. Great to have you, Ted.
It's great to be back, thanks.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's good to see your face again.
Likewise.
Right, so let's talk about resources now on the African continent. Talk to me about which African economies are most vulnerable to commodity price swings today.
Well, I think we're entering another phase where we could see commodity prices falling. A lot of Africa has ridden the wave of incredibly high prices, particularly from late 2022. But as you just reported now, oil prices are down to around $65 a barrel, much lower than where they were 18 months ago. And a number of economies have got used to these high prices. So particularly the case of Nigeria as a major oil and gas exporter, that's going to hurt. But also if we think of things like gold, which has been at record prices, cocoa, 4 times the price where it was before, I think everyone's been getting a little used to these very high prices. And so I think countries like Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire really actually could suffer a bit of a shock over the coming months. If we actually do see a bit of a slowdown in global demand, prices start to fall. But I would have thought, countries like South Africa producing PGM metals, things like platinum and stuff that is used in the latest technology, they should see that demand remain pretty stable. So ultimately, it's just about using the resources and managing that change for all of these African economies.
Right, and I'm just imagining an African, country that has, most of these commodities all stacked, in one country. But just one moment, Ted. I just need to do this for our audience on DSTV. We're joining live coverage with the commissioning of and renovation and upgrade of Government Girls Arabic Secondary Schools. That's happening in Zamfara State. We'll join that on DSTV, but you can continue watching this on all other platforms. We have so many platforms. You can continue watching our show. So thank you, Ted. So I was saying, I could imagine, one country, having gold, oil, that's in fantastic, quantity, for exports, and seeing the price shifts we've seen, in recent times. So I guess if you're if gold is in season, then as a big exporter of gold, you enjoy that. Maybe oil is not doing so well. The profit you get from gold then supports your oil export, but not many countries have that kind of advantage in Africa right now. How have the global shifts, for example, China's slowdown, energy transition, how's that impacting Africa's export revenues altogether?
Yeah, well, I think it's a little early to say exactly what the impact has been from the latest market volatility. I'm talking here about the Trump administration tariffs or non-tariffs, exactly what's going on. That's led to a surge in imports to the US and then a drop-off and a fresh surge. So it's a bit early to say what the impact has been. But we have seen one shift, and one is an energy shift. If you think going back only 10 years, Nigeria was exporting most of its crude oil to the USA. That has dropped to a trickle now because there's so much production in the US, particularly of shale oil and shale gas. So that's one big kind of adjustment to make. But also things like gold, are they really such a good thing to export? Switzerland has been hit with a 23% tariff. And the key reason is they export quite a lot of gold to the US. And that's actually affecting the trade balance as well. So I think basically a lot of it is about managing the resources wisely. And there are good examples of how that could be done. If you look at Botswana, it really has been very impressive the way it's managed the enormous diamond resources there to actually benefit the country itself. But sadly, we've seen too many examples of graft and of money going astray. And of course, this dependence on a single export actually causing problems with the currency, with inflation, and ultimately the standard of living.
And definitely the conversation about industrialization, that comes up a lot, adding value, to raw materials. Are we seeing any improvement coming out of Africa so far?
Well, I think the big problem with value addition industries is very often they don't add value. You have an industry, it might be a processor, it might be a refiner of oil or something. It brings prestige to the country, but it ends up losing huge amounts of money. And I think the basic key problem here, it's nothing to do with the African markets or the ability of Africans to add value. It comes down to power. You know this living in Nigeria. People living in Lagos very often have three generators. They have one when the grid goes down, they have a backup and a backup for the backup, even just to pump water and run the lights. So if you're producing commodities, let's say you're making cocoa products or you're refining petroleum, you need a cheap and reliable source of power. And if you're particularly going to be selling commodities on the international market, let's say something like deodorized cocoa butter, it has to be competitive with other countries which can have cheap and reliable power. So that's really a critical point here. Renewables can help with that as well. Drawing on Africa's resources like oil and gas as well can help that enormously. But until the power issue is fixed, that is always going to hobble any kind of value addition in Africa.
Right. And is the resource curse still a factor, or are some nations, are they breaking that cycle in Africa?
Well, I think the real problem with a lot of resources is that they can create enclave industries. If you think of oil and gas, if you think of a lot of mining, very often, particularly the large-scale mining, it involves a relatively small amount of workers. They are ring-fenced from the rest of the economy. A lot of the experts are foreign experts being paid cash. And there's such huge amounts of opaque money flowing around. There's a big opportunity for graft, embezzlement, and mismanagement. So I think transparency is a key way to address this. But I think there are certain countries which have done very impressively. I mentioned Botswana before, but we've also seen other examples around as well where there is a much more of an effort to try and get transparency in there. A project I'm currently working on in West Africa to set up an Africa Cocoa Exchange is all about that. And Nigeria actually is going to hopefully be leading a pilot with AFEX for the use of warehouse receipts. But that's all about making sure the cocoa is visible and actually unlocking more value for the farmers, the cooperatives, the local processors. So a lot of it is about the approach, but I think it gets back. The curse is if you're dealing with something like oil where it's opaque and it's ring fenced, because ultimately it's not really bringing much benefit to the wider economy.
And definitely, we keep hearing most African leaders, talking about diversifying, their economies. Are there any success stories of reducing, all of that dependency, we see on one resource or a few resources?
Well, I think what's impressive is actually seeing, if you think Africa is very heavily dependent on food, but Nigeria offers a very good example just in one sector how you can change this. If you go back 10, 15 years, Nigeria imported nearly all of its sugar refined in bags. Then they gradually they gradually banned importing in bags, so there was a bagging industry. Then they started to import more raw sugar from Brazil and started refining it. Now they're exporting it. And so they have actually sucked that value addition away from Brazil into Nigeria now. So it can very much be done as a sector. We've seen this the same with cement. It's insane that you should be importing cement from another part of the world when pretty much every country has limestone. You can make cement anywhere. Again, it comes back to energy in that front. So I think really the answer here is to rebalance. There's nothing necessarily wrong about having a particularly large sector for exports or being particularly dependent on certain imports. You've just got to make sure that you actually grasp the value addition opportunities that they are and see if there's more and more things you can process in country. And referring to what the trade minister said as well, this idea of cross-border value chains. If you think in the case of Nigeria, largest producer of tomatoes in Africa, but half of them rot before they get to market. Couldn't we have some cross-border supply chains so we're not importing tomato paste from Italy?
Right, and on the currency front now, we do understand that a lot of African countries rely heavily on most of these commodity exports. But we still see, some African countries, their currencies are still quite strong, at this point. But, we did see a huge devaluation for the naira. Do you think, Nigeria's situation is more serious, than other countries when you compare, currencies?
Well, I think basically that the revaluation was necessary from an economic point of view because it has stabilized inflation, it has stabilized the currency. I think also getting rid of the subsidy on fuel as well. But of course, it caused enormous economic pain to the people of Nigeria. And I can see it. I fly into Lagos Airport now. I can drive straight into the center. I couldn't do that beforehand. There's so much less traffic which is out there. So I think the point is that was a correction. Going forward, all governments really need to think very carefully carefully about how the balance of payments going forward is going to affect the currency. But I think one thing to bear in mind is to try and sidestep this. We have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We have things like the Pan-African Payment Settlement System from Afreximbank, where a Nigerian, let's say, could make a payment to someone in Togo or in Cote d'Ivoire using local currency both sides without the need for dollars. I think a lot more local currency trading could really help address this issue of not being so concerned about the value of the currency itself. Because why, when you have two African countries, are they both seeking dollars when ultimately they just want to exchange goods and be paid in their own currency?
Right, definitely a lot of eyes on the currency front there for Africa. But as the world shifts to renewables, how can African mineral exporters, take the DRC's cobalt, for instance, how can they avoid another boom-bust cycle?
Well, a lot of it comes down to the management of the resources. When times are good, you stack the money away. When times are bad, that's when you actually use that investment to try and boost the economy. And we've seen way too much boom and bust. But I would have said the medium to long-term outlook is very positive for large producers of things like copper, PGM metals, all of these things which are used in things like solar panels, which are used in wind turbines, and also in AI and data centers, etc. So I think the long-term and the medium to long-term is very positive on that front. It's just about managing the resources.
All right, so how will AI and automation, do you think that could reduce global demand for, Africa's labor-intensive exports at some point?
Well, I mean, it's a really difficult question. AI has affected every single sector. I cannot think of any sector that hasn't been affected by it. And obviously, there's a lot of worries that it'll take away jobs. I think really AI offers such really wonderful possibilities for Africa, because one thing is everything about online learning. If you imagine the ability to get education to everyone using AI to fine tune that as well. I think everything about efficiency of systems, AI can help hugely with logistics and transport. We're talking here about getting efficiency out of the system rather than removing workers. But if you bear in mind the majority of the population work in agriculture or supporting the agricultural sector, we need the farmers in the field, we need the drivers, we need the people in logistics out there, we need the manufacturers. So I think ultimately AI could be a huge help. Maybe it might take some jobs if we're thinking things like call center jobs, which are more done by chatbots nowadays. But ultimately, China and other countries are trying to find somewhere cheaper and more efficient to do manufacturing. The opportunities here for Africa: fix the power. That will be important for AI as well, as the IMF was saying. But essentially, Africa has this wonderful demographic bonus, young, a lot of workers there. The opportunities here, AI could enhance that.
All right, I'll see if I can, defend my job against AI, going forward.
Me too.
Thank you so much, Ted George, Chief Narrative Officer at Cleo's Advisory. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.